The fact that I could have had the Tom Felton addiction memoir and instead I have Tom Felton talking about Harry Potter, it's crime to me. It's a crime. Hi, hello, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, oh, what a video to start on. My name is Carly. And if you didn't know because you are a new crusader who has joined the ranks of my small but aggressive and mentally unwell army, you might not know that previous to this year, the majority of the videos that I did on YouTube were about books. I changed this year to do more commentary stuff. I really like doing that. I needed to repair my relationship with reading and just read for fun. And I honestly just love the videos that I'm making. They're very fun for me to make right now. But that being said, I have read 69 books this year. And I figured I will rank systematically every single book I've read this year from worst to best. I'm going to walk you through the categories, and also I'm filming this on like December 18th. So there are 3 books included in this that I have not finished reading yet. So I will introduce you to them before I start ranking, because it's not fair to like say like this is where I haven't finished them, okay? The bottom tier is Her ? From that Arrested Development scene, Her, where these are the worst books that I read this year. I do not rank anything on a number 1 through 5 scale. I read a really interesting article by the Rolling Stones. No, not the magazine, not like Mick Jagger sitting down at his typewriter to write a think piece. And it's all about how like ranking is bad for art. Another reason I found it hard to make book videos is I started to write and I was like, this is a lot harder. Like, to criticize something that I myself am not doing to the height of my ability is insane, some might say. So these are all based on personal preference. If you love this, or if I explain the book to you and it sounds like something you might like, you should read it, because I drop books like it's my job. So basically every single book on this list, regardless of how much I say I don't like it, is pretty good, because I just don't finish books if I don't like them, okay? So the bottom ranking is Her ? And these are books that either I had to read for a video and just didn't really enjoy, or I was expecting more from them. I still finished them, but I wanted more to be given to me through the experience of reading, through spending hours and hours of my brief life on planet Earth, and I didn't get that. The second category is Great Gowns, Beautiful Gowns. This is, of course, in reference to Aretha Franklin talking about Taylor Swift, trying not to say something mean about her and going, great gowns, beautiful gowns. These are not the bottom tier. They are not my favorite book that I've read this year. They did the job. They had great gowns, beautiful gowns, but they didn't leave an impression. Third section is Sorry to This Man, in reference to, of course, Keke Palmer talking about Dick Cheney, I want to say. These are books that I enjoyed, but I do not remember them. They have not impacted me greatly as the year has gone on, but I enjoyed reading them while I read them. Then the second from the top tier is Joe Biden Falling Up the Stairs. It's one of my favorite videos on the internet. So these are all books that I greatly enjoyed and had a good time reading them. They're not like top tier, but I thoroughly enjoyed them. Then I have split up the top tier of books I've read this year. In the bottom section of the top tier is God tier. These are all books that are amazing. They're just not new favorites, because that's the cream of the crop. That's the top tier new favorites. Everything in the new favorites tier and the God tier, I would argue, is the same in quality. For me to have a favorite book though, it's gotta be read at a very specific time in my life, impact me in a very specific way, or it has to be something that I relate to on a deep level. So I don't like to penalize books just because I didn't relate to them. They're still quite good. Okay, let's begin. I'm going to talk about the 3 books that I'm reading right now. The Montreal Stories by Mavis Gallant. This is a collection of short stories by a Canadian author. And I want to say they take place in the 60s, 40s and 50s. Okay, so she has two kind of large bodies of work. She has the Montreal stories and the Paris stories. In 1950, she moved to Paris and wrote a bunch of short stories that all were included in the New Yorker. In that Wes Anderson movie, The French Dispatch, Frances McDormand's character is based off of her. Her earlier stories all took place in Montreal, where she's from. I'm in Canada, and one of my biggest kind of goals this year and next year is to read more and more Canadian authors. These are really, really great. I got introduced to Mavis Gallant because I saw Margaret Atwood speak here in Toronto, and she read one of Mavis Gallant's stories, and I was like, these are very funny and glamorous, and they're all just about young women, like 19, 20, entering adulthood in the 40s, and how like the oppressive religious, I don't want to say vibes because that seems crazy, but like environment of Montreal is impacting their relationship to men and their relationships to themselves. It's dense. I'm getting through it. I'm on page 180, but with short story collections, it's like weird, I feel like, to read them all the way through just one after the other because you want to like sit with the story, but I'm really enjoying them. I'm reading On Palestine by Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pappé. This is just a selection of different kind of essays explaining the occupation in Palestine, and it's, again, also very, very dense, but they're both experts in the field and very good. Haven't finished it yet. And finally, the book I'm also reading right now is Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. Naomi Klein is a Canadian thought maker. I don't know. What would she define herself as? A person who writes nonfiction books about big moments in our cultural history. She wrote a big one on shock post 9/11. I haven't read any of her work. She has a big climate change one, but I'm not a super nonfiction girly. This book just sounded incredibly interesting, and it's basically about how there is a woman who has a name incredibly similar to her and looks fairly similar to her, who is like an alt-right mouthpiece who will go on like Fox News and these alternative alt-right news sources and say wild things, and what it's like to basically have like an evil doppelganger out there in the world and how that relates to just like people in our lives falling down the alt-right rabbit hole. I've only read the introduction, I think, for this, but I'm enjoying it. So those are books that I plan to finish this year. Now we're going to start, of course, in the her section. A lot of these books I have given away because I was mad at them for wasting my time. So the first two books are a part of a trilogy called the New York Trilogy by Paul Auster. This is City of Glass and Ghosts. I received this collection years ago, and I thought it was going to be a collection of hard-boiled, classic, traditional detective stories. What they are is wild, speculative, absurdist musings on the four. I can't even explain it. In one, a guy is watching somebody who's watching him, and I'm making it sound better than it is. And in another one, people who are representations of colors, like red is watching blue. It was just truly, to such a deep extent, not for me. I can't even explain it. I read 2 of the 3 because I was trying to give it a chance, and I could not finish the third and final story because I was just so mad that it wasn't what I wanted it to be. If you like really, really speculative, not based in reality stories, you might enjoy it. I was pissed off by it to an extreme extent. We have Seriously, I'm Kidding by Ellen DeGeneres. I read this for my Ellen memoir video, so you can see my thoughts on that there. Ellen is funny. It's just that like a lot of these celebrity memoirs across the board, you're gonna see that a ton of them are in the lower categories, are written not because anybody had an idea for a book or any interesting perspective on their life, just because they wanted money. So they're boring to read. On that same tangent, we have Beyond the Wand by Tom Felton. This is Tom Felton's memoir. I made another video about this. I think it's a pretty fucking good video, so you should watch it. And it's just kind of him trying to cash in those nostalgia points for the big bucks. He wants some nostalgia bucks for being in the Harry Potter franchise. The most egregious and offensive part of this book is that the last 50 pages or so chronicle his battle with addiction when he moved to Los Angeles. And they are the most interesting parts of the story. Like the fact that I could have had the Tom Felton addiction memoir and instead I have Tom Felton talking about Harry Potter. It's crime to me. It's a crime. We have Wicca Nature Magic by Lisa Chamberlain. I was trying to do some research earlier this year into like witch and Wicca. We're doing a season. Okay, let me explain this. My podcast basically like focuses each season now on a different historical event, and we basically like girl it up and talk about history. Last season we did the Titanic, next season we're doing the Salem witch trials, so I wanted to research like modern witchcraft. This book was about nature magic. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. It was like truly, I want to say 80 pages, but it was dense. It was very, very dense, and the most interesting part of it was when it was just talking about the different kinds of trees that are native around you. I guess related to this, but not really then. The next book in this list is The X-Hex. Where to begin with this? This is a witch modern romance. Here are some things that I liked about this book. It was set in a small Georgian town. There was a lot of like really nice relationships between the main character and her cousin, like some nice female relationships. I didn't find that the explanation of the magic was bad. And I also liked that the main love interest had the same name as my boyfriend, spelled the same way, the Welsh way, R-H-Y-S. So that's what I liked about it. It's a romance where basically a young woman is basically like denying her witch powers and is teaching at the like human university and doesn't want to be a witch. Eventually her family's witch magic bloodline that powers the town is tapped out and she has to figure out how to fix it. To do that, she also has to like work with this guy that she hates. I just don't like romances where the woman is uptight and the guy is easygoing and chill. I just want the woman to be cool, if that makes sense. And she doesn't have to be cool, like actually cool in universe. I just don't want her to be low status. I just don't find it interesting. I did read the sequel to this, which is a different romance of these like in this universe, and I thought it was a lot better. Then of course I read Spare by Prince Harry. This is ranked higher than the bottom of this list because this video went insane. If you want to know what I thought about Spare by Prince Harry, watch that video because really that's the best way for you to get an understanding of just how wild this book is. Here's what I will say. Prince Harry said he was going to write a memoir and really name names, and then he did give us gossip, and you have to appreciate that. I don't need to know about the frostbite on his penis, but he did write about it. You have to respect somebody who has no boundaries. You have to. It's the rule. It's the rules. It's the rules. Then I read, well, next on this list, I'm just gonna keep saying then I read, you're gonna have to accept it. Pineapple Street by Jenny Jackson. I picked this up in the airport on the way home from, I went to a trip to LA. La La Land, Tinseltown, and I wanted to read something on the plane, and my flight was delayed by 3 hours, so I bought this from the airport. So it's like a very much like a book club mom book, and I was like, great, let's clock in. That sounds exactly what I need right now. This tells the story of 3 different siblings. They're all incredibly wealthy, and they come from an old money family who lives in a massive New York brownstone on a street called Pineapple Street, and it's about their different kind of like grapplings with wealth. While I was reading it, I had a good time. I enjoyed it. It killed the 4 hours that I needed it to kill at the airport, right? But like, upon reflection, it just wasn't for me. I love to read about rich people being insane. One of the stories is like, the youngest sister's a party girl and she needs to get serious. And then the oldest sister, her husband lost his job and she's hiding it from her family. And then the middle brother, who I hate, electric chair, he's getting engaged to a woman who is middle class, and the family just kind of treats her like a gold digger. I wanted it to be White Lotus in that the comedy is dialed up about 50% so I can enjoy the antics of rich people behaving badly, not just read it and be like, ugh, be better, do better. But I found it very easy to read. So there's that, okay? The last 2 in this section I know are going to be controversial picks, and that's okay. Before we say goodbye, from the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. I read this series for the first time this year, and spoiler alert, as we get further into the list, I loved it. I love this series. I think it's very good. If you're unfamiliar with it, this is a Japanese novel series where there is a cafe where patrons can go back in time, basically to reconnect with their loved ones who are lost or things of that nature. But the rule is you have to come back before the coffee gets cold. So they can be there for like 10 minutes. And that's like the convention of it, but the more interesting like time travel rule that I really enjoy is that like you can go back, but you cannot change the future concretely. The conversation will have happened, so people can be emotionally affected, but the actual physical outcome is different. So you can tell somebody what you really think of them after a breakup, but that doesn't mean that when you come back, it's going to concretely change your circumstances. And I think that that is actually like a really interesting convention because it plays on the fact that like humans just care about other humans, because although nothing is actually changed in the universe, if your sister dies and you go back in time to tell her how much you care about her, she's still dead. But things have changed in the universe because we're being more open and honest with each other about how we've affected each other. It's great. We're gonna get to the other books. This is the 4th book in the series. This is the newest one. I pre-ordered it because like this book series has me in a chokehold. Like I would mainline all of these series into my veins like it was crack. You inject. No, you smoke crack. Sorry. I found this book to be such a disappointment. The 3rd book in the series was such a lovely, specific ending. It was a very intentional ending to the series, and I just don't feel like this book needed to exist. The stories felt like plays on old conventions and old stories already told in the previous novels, because each novel has like 4 or 5 different people who come into the cafe and it's their story about who they're going back to see. With every story, I was like, it feels like we've been here before and it's less impactful to me. That was just my opinion. I just felt like we've already ended the series and it was great. I don't think we needed to do more. I enjoyed it, I just didn't feel moved. The 3 other books really moved me and made me feel like a human and like I was feeling things. These stories did not. And the final book in the her category is On Writing by Stephen King. This is Stephen King's memoir / basically a book about craft, on how he writes and his musings on writing. He knows, you know what I mean? Like Stephen King would know. He would know. So I read it and I just didn't find it not even applicable. It was just too fucking long. Like, how long is this book? This is like 300 pages almost. And I was like, I feel like I could have taken a 20-page PDF. The actual tips on writing were great. If you care about his journey and just his thoughts on writing as a whole, you will enjoy this book. I just wanted him to be like, this is my routine, this is how I do it. Once we got through the 20 pages of him talking about like what he thinks about writing by hand or whatever, I was just like, I don't care about the rest. So that's that. Okay, we're going to the next category now. Come on, bitch. I simply have to speed up. We have so many books to get through. At the bottom of this list again, in Great Gowns, Beautiful Gowns, we have Wicca by Harmony Nice. Again, another book on Wicca, which is a form of modern witchcraft for research. I thought that this was an incredibly accessible guide and really helped me understand it. She also has a great YouTube channel, and I really enjoyed watching her YouTube channel because she often talks about spirituality and kind of how to like improve your spiritual connection with yourself and with the real world and being present. And she's not online anymore, which to me is the true showing of a mentally well person. If somebody is giving me advice on how to better my life and they are still online, I just don't believe them. But if somebody's like, I don't need to be online anymore, I simply listen to the whispers of the wind and feel the grass beneath my feet, I'm like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. Next on this list is Tales from the Cafe. This is also by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. It is the 2nd book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. This was good. It wasn't my favorite. I found this to be much more like pedantic and repetitive, just a different version that was less effective than the first one. I do like this series. It seems like I don't because I'm talking about the 2 that I don't really like, but once we get to the 2 that I really like, then you're gonna see that I actually am a massive fan of this series. These are 4 or 5 different new stories. I just didn't find them to be as effective or relatable to me, if that makes sense. But they were good. Then we have Perfect Timing by Owen Nichols. This is a contemporary romance. I picked it up at the BMV, which in Toronto is kind of like a secondhand bulk buying bookstore. They just have like random shit there. I was waiting in line and I saw this just kind of like on the table next to the cash register. And I picked up the back and it was like, it's a romance taking place at Edinburgh Fringe between a stand-up comedian who also performs sketch and a musician. And I went, a comedian? I simply must read this. I read this in like 2 days. It was incredibly well written, like from an addictive standpoint. It was just like, it was readable as Basically, a year ago, Tom and Jess met up, had a very bad experience together where she thinks he's a liar and he's kind of hopelessly pining for her. And then 1 year after that, they meet up again at Edinburgh Fringe where Tom is performing with his band who are kind of semi-famous on the cusp of becoming big, and Jess is performing as a part of a comedy showcase. I liked this because she was a woman who was a comedian, and they also did not like really include written portions of her comedy. I tried to read Romantic Comedy, the novel, earlier this year, and it basically takes place at a fake SNL, and it was a fucking nightmare. I've never hated a book more because the main character would constantly complain about how she never got her sketches on the air because of misogyny, but then she would say the idea of her sketch and you'd be like, that doesn't sound funny. So this book, I think, employed an incredibly useful technique of being like, and then I performed stand-up. Imagine it being funny. And I'm like, great, great, I can imagine that being funny. Great. I liked the romance. It follows them throughout their careers. I honestly feel like I should have ranked this higher because I did enjoy this as a romance a lot. I just like didn't care about them being together, but I did care about their relationship. So if you want to read, you know, an Edinburgh Fringe romantic comedy between a musician and a comedian, be my guest. I just thought it was very good, and I kept looking up to be like, surely this author, surely he does comedy, because there is like an innate understanding of how comedians talk. They are annoying, very annoying, impossible to be around, and how people who do improv, we are very annoying, impossible to be around, kind of act and hang out with each other and their relationships to comedy, and he understood it incredibly well, so I enjoyed it. Next book is Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochrane. This is a sapphic Christmas rom-com. I, again, bought this at the airport where I buy my most wild book purchases on my way back from Chicago, and I had just finished reading an absolutely up collection of Japanese short stories and needed something light and fluffy, and I really liked it. So about a year ago, these two women, the main characters, had a meet cute and had like a special perfect night together, and then that falls apart. I'm not gonna say why in case you want to read it. And then a year later, one of the women, in order to make some money because she's being priced out of her Seattle apartment. I want to say Portland. Sorry. She's getting priced out of her Portland apartment. She agrees to pretend to date this very rich playboy so he can get his inheritance. And he can only get his inheritance if he has like a long-term girlfriend or something. It's convoluted, but we love it. So she shows up to his family Christmas to be like, I'm his girlfriend, even though we aren't dating. So give him his inheritance so I get some money, so because I'm getting priced out of my apartment. But his sister is the woman from the meet cute a year ago. This was a very cute romance. Nothing to say about that. It didn't rock my world in any massive way, but it did exactly what it needed to do, and I had a great time reading it. Then we have Happy Place by Emily Henry. I love Emily Henry. She has a book called Book Lovers, which I did reread this year and will be ranked appropriately on this list coming up. And that is my favorite rom-com book of all time. You would think just from the beginning of this video that I'm reading a lot of romances. I don't read an exorbitant amount of romances, but every once in a while I need one to just like, I've just had a rough week and I need to read something just lovely. And Emily Henry really gives that to me. Usually. I did not enjoy this one, but I did because I love everything she writes, and I think she writes incredible banter. It's very evocative of like a Nora Ephron movie, but it's a book and it's contemporary vibes. Love them. This is about a couple who has been together since university, and they're all in their like, let's say 30s, okay? I'm not detail oriented. And they are a part of a larger friend group as well. And every summer they all go to this like little cottage. I don't know what Americans would call it. We call it a cottage here in Canada. And they all just have a fucking vibe, and they just are having a great time. And it's the last year they can all go to the cottage. They've also basically are separated and estranged and are on their way to getting divorced. But they agree to not tell their friends so as to not spoil the last summer they're all gonna spend at this cottage. Great convention. I did really enjoy this. It wasn't for me, but she is a great romance writer. The banter, the dialogue, phenomenal. If it sounds like a convention that you like, you might enjoy this book. For me, I liked the second chance aspect of it because they have to like share a room. Oh no. But they've broken up. Whatever. I liked all those conventions, enjoyed it. But by the end, the miscommunication that caused them to break up was so stupid that I was like, I just don't really think you guys should be together. But I enjoyed it. So, you know, I just was so upset about that. Then we have Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, the book. It's important to note that as I've been doing this, I've kind of been reassessing the order. Like, some of these orders don't really make sense. It's fine. You know what this book is about. You know what this book is about. Like, you know what this book is about. And if you don't, I want the peace and calm and the offline life that you have. This is basically a fictionalized Fleetwood Mac oral history. It's told through transcriptions of interviews, and it's about Daisy Jones and the Six, which was a band in the 70s, and how they got together and how they broke up. I had no interest in reading this book. I tried to read it a couple years ago, couldn't get into it. And then I saw the trailer for the show and I went, this looks fucking phenomenal. And I love the 70s more than anything. And I enjoyed it. I think I get why it's so popular. It's incredibly readable. The 70s are a vibe. The form I didn't really enjoy. I would love a bit more description, which is not a sentence I ever thought I'd ever say. It was fine. I did read it on again, all these books I'm reading in transit. Iconic. I read this on the train back from Montreal during what is one of the most tumultuous, awful weekends of my personal life. And it did exactly what it needed to do. I could read it the whole time. It was great escapism. Like, do I think this is the best book ever? No. I also read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by her, and I thought that was much better. It's just more for me. Love the 70s. Love the vibe. I liked the show. It's just like, it's what it was. No book can be as universally loved like this book is and be like amazing. Does that make sense? Like, in order to be universally loved like Daisy Jones and the Six is, you can't take big swings. It just has to be like a good time, and it is a good time. And I will say 2 things to note about this book. Every single woman character is incredibly complex. Their relationships are very interesting. They're very different from each other, but I enjoyed them a lot. Every male character in this book is basically interchangeable besides the main character. That's fine. I think the show does a much better job of being like, these guys are different and this is how they're different. And also there's a plot twist at the end that so annoying. I didn't like that. I don't think you need a plot twist to like make a story interesting. I was mad about it, and if you know what the plot twist at the end is, I was mad about that. Next we have You Again by Kate Golbeck. Again, another romance. This is a real romance section. This was a bummer to me. I've seen this book recommended a bit online and people really enjoyed it. I was ready to fucking clock in and be like, this is gonna be my favorite book of 2023 because it's a When Harry Met Sally retelling where the genders are swapped and the man is the romantic and the woman is the skeptic, and they met because they were both having sex, or at least like seeing the same girl, because the woman is bisexual and she's also a comedian. So I went, right here, just injected into my brainstem. I was so excited to love it. It was fine. You got to give bonus points to at some point when she's in kind of like a post-breakup depression. One of her best friends goes, "You haven't even shown up to Herald practice." 10 out of 10. No notes on that. Honestly, at all. I did enjoy this book. I just found it to be like 410 pages. And I think I enjoyed the first section a lot. I found the banter to be good. And I love When Harry Met Sally. It's just like, it was so much back and forth that I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I wanted to enjoy it so much more than I did, and that book is one of the biggest heartbreaks of this year. I just wanted to like it. Also, apparently it's published Reylo fanfiction, like Rey and Kylo Ren, which is also The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. That's also published Star Wars Reylo fanfiction, which is fucking insane. That's wild. Just the chokehold that Reylo fanfiction has in the contemporary romance market. I feel like it should be studied. Finally, in this section, in Great Gowns, Beautiful Gowns, I read Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Marie Rilke. I read this forever ago for one of my Celebrity Book Club videos. I've been doing some rereading of books that I read for YouTube videos because I wanted to read them on my own time, in my own pace, and be able to metabolize them over the course of months so that my opinions are like consistent on them. Because sometimes I'll let you peek behind the curtain, like we're in the goddamn Wizard of Oz, babe. But sometimes when you're making videos about stuff online, you have to take a big swing of an opinion, and then you revisit that opinion in like 3 months, and you're like, I don't know if I think that. So I wanted to reread this book. I got this again at the BMV, truly for, I want to say, for $4. So I was like, why not? Rilke is a poet, and this is a collection of letters that he wrote to a young poet who he was mentoring, and they're basically about life and poetry and the creation of art. This was my favorite book from the section, obviously, because we're going from worst to best. The first letter I thought was phenomenal, and I was like, oh my god, I'm so wrong about this book, because I found this book to be like, okay, I think the first time. And I read this first letter, and I was like, this goes so hard. I love this, because the first letter, there was a section of advice that I thought was very interesting where the poet that contacted Rilke was basically like, I've included my poems, are they good? And he was like, if you're asking me if they're good, they're not, because you should be looking inward for your own validation. And I was like, fucking, oh, And then a lot of it was like, I just didn't care. I just didn't care. I do think, and this is going to sound like I'm a misandry. I think if you are a man, you might like this more because he talks a lot about loneliness and beauty in women in a way that I was just like, gross. Didn't like it. But I get why people would. I do. This is the change in my whole entire persona, a slow but sure understanding of other people's tastes. Wild. Next section, sorry to this man. Okay, it's this group right here. We're not doing well. Okay. The first book in this section is Will They or Won't They by Ava Wilder. This is a kind of like Hollywood celebrity contemporary romance. Again, the bottom of this list would lead you to believe that I read 50 romances a year. I just need them to give me the will to live every now and then. I'm a rom-com movie fan, and sometimes I need a little rom-com book just to like enjoy my life. So she writes like celebrity romances set in LA. I read How to Fake It in Hollywood, which was a fake dating, like PR relationship romance. She wrote that, and I read it last year, and it was a lot more about like addiction and trauma than this one was. This one was a lot more fun. And I think I liked this one better. This follows two actors, and they dated during the first season of their like teen Riverdale supernatural-esque show. And they had vibes when they were like doing the like chemistry read and like in the pilot. And the first season of the show, they dated, and then they broke up and made life a living hell for everyone on set. And she left during season 5. And her career tanked after she left, and now she's returning for like season 9, the final season of the show, and they have to work together even though they hate each other. I like this one. What I find really interesting about it is like I didn't really even like find the characters to be that relatable or likable to me, but I really respected them and their grind, and they were both very hardworking, and there was a lot of like, now that our careers are ending, what does this mean? Good sex scenes, I will say. She could write the hell out of a sex scene. By the end, I was like, yes. The ending is correct, and I believed that these characters would act this way every single step of the way, and I enjoyed it. Then we have The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I do talk about my thoughts on this book and the movie in my last video, I think. I read this while I had the flu. A flu so intense, I thought I was going to pass away. I was not expecting anything from this book. I only wanted to read it because I knew I wanted to watch the movie. It's basically a Hunger Games prequel where the fascist president is a hot teen boy. That's just not something that appeals to me. I fucking love this book for like what it was. You know what I mean? I wasn't like, Pulitzer Prize, Suzanne Collins, but it's very readable. And because of the way it's written, I think it's written like a close third person. You really get to stay inside his internal monologue in a way that is very fun because he's just evil and shitty. And it's very fun to have like an anti-hero be the person that pushes this plot through because you're like, you're awful. You're a bad, bad, bad man. It's a fun book. I surprisingly enjoyed this a lot. Next we have Ghost Lovers by Lisa Taddeo. This is the part of the list where I was like, I don't know. On either end of the spectrum of this ranking, I'm there and I agree. The top books, I agree with. The bottom books, I agree with. The middle, who's to say? I've ranked this throughout the year. So on some days, I would agree with this ranking. And on other days, I'm like, is a Lisa Taddeo short story collection really just one slot above the Hunger Games? That's crazy. This is a short story collection. It's contemporary. It's very like hot girl literature. And it's just about these different women. One is about a podcast host who talks to women in crisis. The other is about a woman who invents an app that like helps you text your crush or whatever. It was good. I didn't really enjoy it for what it was, but I could see how well written it was, if that makes sense. Like reading it, I was slogging through it, but I did respect the craft so much. It was so well written, even though it wasn't for me. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. And like, this is what I mean. This is a crazy ranking because this is what I have ranked next. Like, that's insane. I'm sorry, what was I thinking? This is the second book in the like X-Hex trilogy or series or whatever. And I really enjoyed this. This is about like a main character who's like a very kind of tacky, kitschy witch, and she runs like a shop in the small town that's like a tourist trap shithole that just sells like plastic witch hats and stuff. And then this pretentious guy moves to town and starts running like a very serious witch store. And it's enemies to lovers, and I liked this one a lot better because she's like her own person. She's confident, she's cool. It was very much the vibe that I was looking for in the fall, and I don't have to explain myself to you any further. And then we have Scammer by Caroline Calloway. Like, what is this ranking? Respectfully, Carly. Carly, what was this ranking? What were you thinking? I genuinely want to know what I was thinking. Because I don't understand. This is Caroline Calloway. Where to begin? She's an online persona that got in trouble for scamming. She became really famous when that op-ed written by her ghostwriter who wrote her really long-winded Instagram captions that got her fame went live in The Cut, called I Am Caroline Calloway, or I Was Caroline Calloway. And that brought her into the zeitgeist. She also hosted a bunch of creativity workshops that kind of like flopped just because she didn't plan them well. If you don't know who she is, like, it's really hard to explain. Like, in the pandemic, her lore meant so much to me. And I ordered this book in 2020 because it was supposed to come out in 2020 and I received it in 2023. Did I order this book in 2020 in the throes of a kind of deep obsession with the Caroline Calloway lore, and I received it in 2023? Absolutely nothing but love and light towards that decision for my past self. I was doing the best that I could with the tools I had at that time. Could not believe I ever received this book. Shocked to my core. She is online and she will. I'm not in the mood to be kind of in contact with her about this review because I believe, as I've said before on this channel, women have a God-given right to just be kind of unhinged and unwell publicly online. And that's her right as a person. Here's what I will say about this book. If you are going to self-publish a memoir, oh, you better make it unhinged. And she did. It's unhinged. It was a little trauma porny for me if you are thinking of reading it. Lots of questions about your well-being. I would see if you can find any trigger warnings online. It's a lot. Reading this book, I said this when I reviewed this on my Instagram story, but like, it is the vibe of, you know, when your friend is like, and can you believe what happened? He did that to me. I'm innocent and I'm minding my own business and this happened. And you're like, I don't know if I feel like you're kind of playing a part in this. Which we all have been both people in that scenario. Reading this book is like having a conversation like that, where your friend is just telling you gossip and you're like, oh my God, what? So do with that information what you will. After that, we have the Paris Hilton memoir, Paris. I made a video on this if you want to know my thoughts about it. I think out of all the celebrity memoirs I read this year, this was my favorite. I thought it was pretty well done in terms of at least having a reason to write it, because she focuses on a lot of traumatic aspects of her childhood and kind of tries to contextualize that in with modern feminism, okay? It's fun. Next, we have 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This is another romance. Picked this up at the BMV, as I do. That's kind of my thing. This is about two people who are both authors. She is chronically ill and writes vampire, romance novels, and he's the great Black novelist of the 21st century and has won all these awards. And they went to high school together for a couple of weeks in June, 7 days, some might say. Well, they spent 7 days together in June where they were friends, and that ended. Something happened, and now they are meeting up again in adult life. I thought this was great. I thought it was very well written. I love stuff that's just about literature. I just find that very interesting when characters are authors or whatever. This is a good mediation on how trauma and survivor's guilt can affect your relationships. I just thought this was very, very good. Then we have She and Her Cat. This is by Makoto Shinkai and Naruki Nagakawa. This is basically a collection of different short stories about people and their relationship with their cats. It has beautiful artwork. Let me see if I can show you some of it. I'm sorry. Gorgeous. And the stories are nice and sweet. I didn't feel myself incredibly, impacted by this, but I really enjoyed it when I was reading it. And a lot of them are, I think they're all from the perspective of the cats, which is just a lot of fun. I enjoyed these. They're fun. And then we have Winter in Sokcho by Eliza Shaw Dusapin. She is a Korean-French author, and this is about a woman who is working at an inn in Sokcho, which is a tourist town that is coastal and on the border of North and South Korea. It's in South Korea, but it's very close to the DMZ. Yes. I was gonna say DMV. It's decidedly not the DMV, it's the DMZ. So in the summer, it's very lively, but in the winter, it's just this snowy wasteland where nobody comes, and she's working at an inn during the winter, and a French man comes and stays at the inn to work on a kind of journalistic graphic novel, and he wants to go and see the border between North and South Korea. And it's just kind of eerie and lonely and snowy, and you don't really know what's happening or what isn't. This was maybe the first book I read this year, and it's just if you want a winter vibes book, read this book. I didn't care for the magical realism elements, because when do I usually? Not a lot. But every other element of it, I was this is so just kind of desolate and isolated and snowy and good vibes. Then we have The Bullet That Missed by Richard Osman. So the other series that I read and loved this year was the Thursday Murder Club. And this is about a group of senior citizens who, at their retirement home, solve mysteries. It's everything I want from a series, and I have been dutifully waiting for the 4th book in the series to be delivered to me because I pre-ordered it 5 months ago, and I'm waiting, just waiting for these. They're just joys to read. They're very much like book club, kind of like grandma books, in the sense that, like, by that I mean it's a book that my grandmother would read and love. They're just kind of like funny, and there's like a weird amount of like shootouts and drama, but still ultimately cozy, and about like, they're just very inspiring too, because it's like life doesn't end when you get to a certain age. You can still have this rebirth and make new friends and learn new things even as you age. Like, how rare is it to have a book series where all of the main characters, besides like 2, are in their like 70s? It's just great. This is about a young woman who was a news journalist. It's a cold case from like 10 years ago, who is presumed to have driven her car off a cliff and killed herself, but they never found the body. And the Thursday Murder Club is on the case. I guess I enjoyed this the least amount, but I still love this series more than anything. Next, we have Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Again, this is one of those books that I do not know if I would change the ranking now that there's been time in between. I've never read R.F. Kuang before. I'm not a fantasy girl. I just cannot get into it, and I'm so sorry. I would love to, but I can't. This is her first like contemporary just novel set in our human world with our human rules, and I did enjoy it. I think that she has an exemplary gift of writing addictively. Like, I wanted to read this book in like 3 days because it was just, I needed to figure out what happens. This follows the internal monologue of a white author who constantly compares herself to a counterpart of hers who is Chinese, American, and is like very much like an award-winning, lauded young author. That author dies, and she steals her manuscript and publishes it under her own name, basically like literary Yellowface. And it's just about her going through that. I enjoyed reading it because I was like, oh God. Like, you know when it's just the internal monologue of somebody trying to get away with something and they're just doing such a bad job, and you're like, It is fun. And also, it's very similar to what I said about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, where I really enjoy reading books where a morally gray or just unethical narrator is the head that we're spending all the time in. I just find it very engaging and very interesting. I don't read books to see good people make good decisions. I want bad decisions basically always. So I enjoyed reading it. Cindy did like a very good video essay kind of breaking down the actual ethics and implications of like the use of race in this book. I will link it down below. I feel like that's an opinion that matters a lot more than mine in this, in like the actual conversation of the content of this book. But I did enjoy physically reading it. It's like written very much like a YA, but about adults with more adult themes. Enjoyed it. I don't know, do your research. Next we have Really Good Actually by Monica Heisey. She's an author and a comedian who lives in London now, but she used to live in Toronto, and she used to do comedy in Toronto, and truly the amount of people that I know that she knows is insane. I truly like cannot review this unbiased, because like so many characters in this book are based on people that I know, which nothing but love. This is about a young woman who got in a relationship and got married quite young, even though they're like contemporary, cool, Toronto people. So she's basically divorced. She's like a 30-year-old divorcee, and it just follows her experience the year after, kind of processing the grief of the end of that relationship, while also just like being much younger than all the other people who are experiencing divorce in like divorce media and literature. It's very funny. It's set in Toronto, which I love. And the main character is quite selfish, and that's the point, and I enjoyed it. I didn't find myself overtly impacted by this in the long run, but I would not recommend it. Does that make sense? And I love books set in Toronto. Any book set in Toronto, I will read this. I do feel like I ranked that more low than it actually is in the list. Just thinking about that now. Then we have Weather by Jenny Offhill. What is this book? Because I can't remember. Like, I read it and I remember what happens, but I'm trying to think of how to like water it down so that you can understand what I have read. This is about a young woman, and basically it is about how in times of trauma and in difficult situations, we oftentimes act as therapists and caretakers for everyone in our life. But it's lit fic, so like nothing happens, really. Her mother, who is divorced, is afraid to leave the house. Her brother is a recovering addict. Her job is spent answering fan mail and letters for her mentor's podcast. And her mentor is like a once lauded, like a professor and thought leader who now she has become terrified of climate change. I think a lot of it is basically about like climate change, doom, and anxiety, but it's basically about how this woman takes care of everyone in her life. It's but nothing happens, you know. It's very lit ficky. I enjoyed it a lot. I don't remember what happened. It didn't leave a lasting impact on me, but it did what good lit fic does, where as I'm reading it, I'm just kind of like feeling what I'm supposed to feel, even though I don't know why I'm feeling it. Then we have People from My Neighborhood by Hiromi Kawakami. This is the collection of Japanese short stories that I was referring to before, where I had to read that sapphic romance just as a palate cleanser for whatever the this book is. I've never read anything like it, which I think is why it's ranked so high on the list. These are super, super short stories, like probably maybe flash fiction. They're all like a page to 3 pages long, and they're all about different people in this one neighborhood in Japan. But there's a lot of magical realism. At one point, a bunch of people turn into pigeons. Another story is about a man who runs the dog school, and he's the principal of the dog school. There's another story about a woman who falls in love with a smelly ball of goo. Like, I can't explain it beyond that. They're super, super weird, but I've never read anything like it before or since. So I think about it a lot. And it's a quick read. It's but it's quick. I enjoyed it. Okay, next section. It's time for that video of Joe Biden falling up the stairs. Let's get the next group of books. Look at this group. Look at this. Okay, that's heavy. At the bottom of this section, we're starting out with Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagasawa. This is about a 25-year-old woman who has been secretly dating a man in her office, and then that man gets engaged to his fiance, and she also loses her job, and her life is just bad. So she goes and works at a bookshop in a district somewhere in Tokyo. I think so. Yes. And it's the book district. And it's basically a district with a bunch of different kinds of secondhand and specialized bookshops. And she works and stays at her uncle's bookshop that's been owned by her family for generations, but he's kind of weird, if that makes sense. Like, he's weird and the family's kind of like, well, what's going on with him? And together they just like learn from each other, and she learns about literature and the importance of books and how to grow as a person. It's really short. This is a very, very short book. This is 139 pages. The first half is a banger. The second half, there's some messages on forgiveness that I don't know if I agree with, but that's life. I think it's a very like slow book about, like, if you're looking for something life affirming and about not always having everything figured out in your life and how that's okay, read this book. I enjoyed it a lot. Then we have The Man Who Died Twice by Richard Osman. This is another Thursday Murder Club book. Oh, in this book, one of the main characters, who is, again, an old woman in a retirement home, is basically tasked with having to murder a man or her friends will die. And it's all about that. Oh, these books are so fun. These books are so fun. That's all I can say about the Thursday Murder Club. Just a romp. What can I say? Then we have I'm With the Band, Confessions of a Groupie by Pamela DeBars. She was a famous groupie in the 70s. I went through earlier in the spring just like a hardcore 70s phase. It's a compilation of basically her early journals when she was a young child, I will say, because it basically spans from like when she was like 14 to like 25, maybe. It's about her being a groupie for a lot of the bands in Laurel Canyon at the time, like the Flying Burrito Brothers. She's also around Mick Jagger a bit, but that's the vibe. It's like late, more like later Laurel Canyon, not like Joni Mitchell or Crosby, Stills, and Nash. If that matters to you, it matters to me that you know that. This is a very strange book because it is very much, and this, my friend Blair read this book, and this was her thought about it, and I think it's very true, where it's very much marketed as like, hold no bards, sexy memoir about fucking rock stars. In actuality, the diary of a teenage girl who is basically being groomed over and over again by these grown men who are rock stars, and naming names fully. So it's quite startling to read because the language is so juvenile and it's so much about having crushes because she's a teenager. It's very strange and hard to read, but a very interesting look at that life. She's still alive now, vibing. I think the interesting kind of like relationship of all the groupies is very cool, and it's a very interesting look at like what life was really like in Laurel Canyon in the 70s. It's tough though. She doesn't seem to think of it as bad, like she's just vibing and enjoying her life and like that's good for her. It's tough to read, but I enjoyed it a lot. Then we have Pity the Reader by Kurt Vonnegut and Suzanne McConnell. This is a massive thickie that I read over the course of several days. Weeks, months. Why am I saying days? I'm trying to flex you. And this is a compilation of all of Kurt Vonnegut's like tips and thoughts and teachings on writing. Suzanne is a former pupil of his and a longtime friend of his, and she was tasked with compiling stories about his life and writing and also his teachings on writing into this massive book. And it's just a really great book on writing. I would super recommend it if you're looking to get into it, because Kurt Vonnegut, although he did teach at the Iowa Writers Workshop and the way that he thinks about writing can be very academic and he's very interested in that, he writes to entertain, so his thoughts on writing are not inaccessible. The reason it's called Pity the Reader is because one of his major tenets on writing is that in the world we are not at a shortage for great writers, but we are at a shortage for reliable readers, because to sit down and read a book is a massive undertaking, so you should take pity on your reader and make it interesting and an engaging experience to read your book. Loved it. Then we have Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I was talking about Emily Henry earlier. This is my favorite Emily Henry book, and I reread it this year because I sometimes just need to feel something joyful. This is about a main character like named Nora, and she's basically kind of a bitch, and that's why I love her. She's a literary agent that is a shark and a badass and takes no prisoners. And she meets an editor named Charlie in the city, and everyone hates him because he's cranky and awful too. Then, while she goes to a small town with her sister, she reconnects with Charlie who lives there, and a romance ensues. But I just like that she loves her career and she isn't going to apologize for being mean, like being kind of mean in relation to your job and getting what you want. And I don't mean being cruel, I mean like not putting on forced niceties is not a crime, and it's so nice to read a book where the main character's like, I'm doing my job, like I just don't really care if you think I'm sweet or not, I'm doing my job. Oh, a great reread, loved it on the reread, loved it. Then, after that, we have the first Before the Coffee Gets Cold book. This book really did come to me at just like a gorgeous, lovely time. I think this is a phenomenal first book in a series. If you're looking to start with this series, read the first book. It's lovely. I'm not going to tell you what the stories are, but you know, go back in the time and the coffee gets cold. Great. I also, you can probably tell from a lot of these books, went through a big short story collection phase. I read Lot by Brian Washington, which I did read a while ago, but I like took it in this time, if you know what I mean. This is a collection of short stories all taking place in the same neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, all focusing on different members of this neighborhood, and the majority, if not all of them, are immigrants and their relationship with the American dream, and also like poverty or queerness or different aspects of that. Brian Washington is a god when it comes to writing dialogue. I don't think there's any other writer out there who is writing dialogue as realistic and evocative as he is. And I did enjoy this. I thought it was quite good. His novels are better, I will say, but this is a great short story collection. Then I read What You Are Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama. This is kind of the same setup as She and Her Cat and also the Before the Coffee Gets Cold books, where every single chapter follows a different individual who goes to the library, and the librarian there gives them a book that is maybe not what they're looking for, but what they need at the time. So maybe if they're looking to be more entrepreneurial, they'll go ask for a book that's about starting up a business, but then the librarian will also give them like a children's book that teaches them about the importance of taking care of themselves or something. It's really well done, really well written, and I think honestly better written than the Before the Coffee Gets Cold books. I liked it. Okay, sorry, we're back. Had to take a break. I lost my mind. Okay, well, what's happening here? Because it feels like every single book I've read has fallen. Now that I've sufficiently moaned into the microphone, let's continue on our journey tonight. Still in that video of Joe Biden falling up the stairs, we have the poetry collection In the Pink by the Raving Beauties. The Raving Beauties was a feminist poetry collective that performed poems predominantly written by women or femme identifying people in the UK in the 80s. They would go to the Edinburgh Fringe and perform these pieces. And this is a collection of pieces selected by the Raving Beauties and performed by the Raving Beauties. And it's just like a lovely collection of women's poetry. I got it at the BMV for $7. It has an amazing inscription that says, "Kath, a raving beauty of a book, the pink of women's poetry. Hope you enjoy reading it. With love, Teresa, May 1989. What a joy to just read used books and find stuff like that. You know, great collection of women's poetry. Introduced me to a lot of great poems. I really enjoyed it. Then we have You Have to Make Your Own Fun Around Here by Frances Mackin. This is an Irish book, and it is told from the perspective of Katie, and basically follows the relationships and dynamics of her friend group with Evelyn and Maeve. Evelyn is like a leader and kind of mean and alpha and really picks on Maeve, and it just follows the dynamics of these three and their relationship as they go from young children to adults and how class in their small Irish town affects that and things like that. It's just really interesting, a really, really realistic portrayal of like the complexities of female friendship, especially when you're young. And also the like story of this friendship is set against the backdrop of this mystery where one of the girls in their high school goes missing, and you don't really get a lot of like closure on that, but it's just a very interesting, fun read. I saw a lot of, when I was looking at reviews of it later, I saw a lot of criticisms of it saying that the main character, Evelyn, who is like the antagonist and also best friend of Katie, the narrator, is really unlikable. And I'm like, yeah, that's what's fun about it. Like, she's a young girl, she's a teenager, and she sucks and she's mean and she's insecure. That's what's compelling about reading the book, because she's unhinged. That's what's fun about it. Then we have Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I have never read an Ann Patchett book, and it reads super easy. It's like lit fic book club good vibes. Enjoyed it a lot. This book takes place during the summer of the 2020 pandemic. Ever heard of it? And it's basically a mother telling her 3 adult daughters a story, because all of the daughters have returned to their cherry orchard in Michigan to help pick cherries during the pandemic, and to pass the time, they're like, tell us the story. And the story is, when the mother was a young girl, she did summer stock theater and had a relationship with one of the actors there before he became a massive movie star. And it's just about her summers there, and I really, really enjoyed it. Lots of interesting kind of takes on acting and theater and art. Also, like the lives our parents have before us, written super well. You go back from like her telling the story to like then them all on the farm, and it just makes you want to find out what happens so bad. Like, I was reading this so fast because I was like, what happens? Characters from like the main timeline come into the story, and characters from the story come into the main timeline. It's just a joy, very fun to read, very quick read. And I just really enjoyed it. Sue me. Next we have The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. I loved this book. I read this recently and I read it like 3 days, just super, super readable. Caroline O'Donoghue is the host of the podcast Sentimental Garbage, where people come on and talk about like their favorite nostalgic kind of guilty pleasure media, and she's super, super funny, and I love her deeply. And this is one of her novels. It's, I think, one of her first adult lit fic novels, and it's basically about this friendship between a young woman in Cork. So it's basically about a young woman growing up in Cork, Ireland, and her relationship with James, her best friend, who is a closeted gay man. And the inciting incident is basically that Rachel has a crush on one of her literature professors, and they hatch a plot for her to sleep with him. And it's just a really interesting, again, like mediation on class. There's some interesting conversations about abortion rights in Ireland, but it's just like a very beautiful, lovely, lovely story that I haven't really seen a lot of like focusing on the intimacies and how important friendship is. And it's focusing on a friendship between a young woman and a gay man, and it's just a beautiful, lovely, 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 super readable. I just had a really good time reading that book, honestly. No notes. Okay, then we have 5 Tuesdays in Winter by Lily King. This is a short story collection. My favorite story from this collection is the titular 5 Tuesdays in Winter. And it's about this divorcee who runs a bookshop in Maine, and he kind of has this crush, one-sided pining for his employee and about their relationship and how it grows. All of these stories are just like lovely little pockets into lives, and it's nice when you get to read a short story collection that's like not about trauma, but actually gives you like happy endings and beautiful moments in people's lives where they grow and learn about each other. Also, it takes place in Maine, and a lot of them are in the winter, so if you're looking for like a winter cozy read, would really enjoy this. What a lovely short story collection. I truly loved that. The last book in the section, Joe Biden Falling Up the Stairs, is Self-Help by Lori Moore. Another short story collection. Lori Moore is kind of like known for her short story collections. They're iconic. I just picked this one up at the library because the cover looked gorgeous. This is the first short story collection she wrote, and she wrote it when she was in her 20s, which is like really kind of too much to metabolize at this time. Like, we simply cannot think about the repercussions of her being this talented that young. I'm not interested in investigating it, quite honestly. And it's called Self-Help because a good amount of the stories in this collection are written almost as self-help articles, even though they are narratives. So one of the first stories is called How to Be the Other Woman, and it's kind of told in like second POV, where it goes, you put on a trench coat and you meet him in the rain. Things like that. Not all of them are. The last story is just written in a close third person, and it's about this woman who's been so hard done by life and just so polite, and what happens when she's pushed to her limit, and it's just wild. It's a great short story collection focusing on just like kind of weird moments in these women's lives. I think this was in like the 80s, so like strap in for that kind of dynamic just so you're ready for it. But it's really well written. She's so talented. And I think that there's like something for everybody in this collection. I liked it a lot. That's all I can say. Now we're getting into God tier. Let me grab this. The difference between God tier and a new favorite is basically they're the same exact quality. It's just that the books in new favorites touched me in a specific way, whether it be I read them at the right time or I identify with something so deeply in it that it's almost impossible for me to understand it. So these books in God tier are amazing. You could not go wrong with any one of them. It's just that they just missed out by just a hair on being a new favorite. So at the bottom, we have the Yokohamu Kadashi Cuckoo, 2 and 3, the manga. This is the only manga I would lay my life on the line for. Truly, like, I would give my life for these books. They are lovely. They are basically the only thing that brings me joy anymore. They are about a robot who runs a cafe in dystopian Japan, but it's not like scary. It's just that like climate change has happened. It's wiped out a lot of the human race, and now nature is basically taken back and there's less humans and they live in harmony with robots, and she just lives her damn fucking life. She talks to the village kids. She learns to swim. She meets her sister. She brews coffee and hangs out and plays the mandolin, and it's all I want from a tale. It's all, I am not interested in anything else. I love those books. So just, comfortable. It's just lovely. Just lovely, lovely. And we have Girl Juice by Benji Nate. This is a graphic novel, and I'm not really, even though I just talked about a manga, I'm not really a graphic novel girly. I just never was. But this book is, no word of a lie, the funniest book I've ever read in my entire life. I've never laughed out loud the way I laughed out loud while reading this book. I cannot believe a book is this funny. The way that I would describe this book is it's basically if a book was a sitcom like New Girl, and all of the characters are young women in their 20s living in a house together and getting into shenanigans. It's funny, funny, funny. It's just amazing. One of them is just like kind of a maniac who's super sex positive and gets them all into trouble. One of them is like has a clown fetish, which is so funny. I just laughed and laughed and laughed every time I read this book. Oh, so funny. Read this book, Jesus. Then we have Odd Woman in the City by Vivian Gornick. I picked this up at the library. I read this last year and I wanted to reread it because I've been rereading a couple books just to make sure that I'm really like taking them in. This is a memoir kind of / collection of essays written by Vivian Gornick, basically about her observations as a woman in her like 60s and 70s about art and life and what's important, but it's told through like the guise of her taking these long walks through New York City every day and her relationship with one of her friends, and just like they just walk around and talk about life, and it's kind of like a love letter to the city and also just about all the lessons she's learned. There was a real part that stuck with me in this book that I really enjoyed, where she talked about how she realized that like she was spending so much energy thinking about how her life should be, what kind of writer she should be, and what it will be like when she has the life that she thinks she should have. So much mental energy was going into that fantasy that she wasn't actually like writing or doing the work that she needed to do in the current moment. So just like wise musings like that. Really, really a lovely collection of nonfiction. Then we have A Psalm for the Wild Built and A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. This is kind of a fantasy, cozy sci-fi fantasy duology. And the series is called The Monk and the Robot. This takes place in like a futuristic world, post-capitalism, that I want to live in so fucking bad, it's crazy. Where basically hundreds of years ago, all of the robots became sentient and didn't want to work for humans anymore and basically be like servants and slaves and just left. Never came back again. And the main character is a tea monk who goes from city to city, town to town in a little trolley and sets up a tea station where people come and tell them their problems. While they are on their journeys, they run into a robot that has been sent by the other robots to go and do research on the humans and answer the question, what do humans need? And basically as a duo, they go to different towns and talk to different humans and try to answer the question, what do we need? It's cozy, it's lovely, it's life-affirming. If you're feeling a little aimless or like you're stuck and you don't know what you want to do with your life or you feel that you're not achieving enough, these books are just lovely. A nice read. And I'm not like a sci-fi fantasy, like I just like books that exist in our world and these were f***ing fire. Then we had Just Kids by Patti Smith. If you can believe I haven't read this book. It's actually impossible for people to fathom that I haven't read this book because it's so up my alley. This is a memoir written by Patti Smith chronicling her relationship with the famous photographer Robert Mapplethorpe. They met when she just kind of like showed up in New York in the 60s and 70s and just like they started a relationship together. It's a really interesting kind of look at sexuality because they dated and then he identified as gay, but he was in love with her. Just kind of like interesting look at how like queerness manifests in times earlier, like they just didn't really have the language for it. And just about like what an artistic and interesting hub New York in the 60s and 70s was, but also just how relationships grow over time and can become like seminal relationships to us. It's just a really, really lovely book. It wasn't a favorite because I found it good the whole time I was reading it. The last like 50 pages are some of the most beautiful writing I've literally ever encountered, and that was amazing. But the other parts I was like, yeah, this is fun. It's fun. I'm having fun. And then I was moved at the end and I did really enjoy it. Another just amazing part about that is like everyone was just like hanging around back then. So she was like a nobody just like hanging out at the Chelsea Hotel and then like all these famous people were there. Like you'll read this book and she'll be like, and Andy Warhol was there. Anyways, wild. But a great read. I enjoyed it a lot. Then we have The Idiot by Elif Batuman. This is a Pulitzer Prize finalist hot girl book. I love this book. I don't even really know what to say about this because I think it is best enjoyed just kind of like going in and spending time with the characters. It's fairly plotless and just a lovely little, I don't know, it's just lovely to like enter this pocket and spend time with this character. It's about Selin, who is a first-year student at Harvard, and basically she falls in love with a man in her Russian class, and that's all I really want to say. But she's funny and so interesting. Like, she's just so clever and amazing, and I loved spending time with her, and just like I liked her a lot. And there's also just a lot of really interesting questions about like aesthetics and relationships, and I don't really want to say anything else. But I loved it. I just can't believe something is written like this. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, here's a line I underlined. Beautiful people lived in a different world, had different relations with people. From the beginning, they were raised for love. Like, okay, talking about they were shopping in a department store, and it says, the men's department made no sense. The way nothing seemed designed to surprise or delight you, and everything looked the same. Just like I just loved it. I just think it's so well written. You know when you read a book and you're like, this is just like crafted well. That's how I felt. And finally, the last book in the God tier section is Her First Palestinian by Saeed Tibi. Saeed was my teacher. He led a short story workshop that I was in and taught me like basically how to write short stories. So like I am biased. Full stop, full stop. He didn't ask me to read this book in any way. I was just like, if somebody's gonna teach me, I do kind of at the end of the class want to know. If you're giving me notes, let's see what you got. And these are fucking crazy. It's insane. You get so lucky when you just like sign up for a class and like the teacher ends up being an absolute banger writer. All of these short stories are about Palestinian Canadians and their relationship with Palestine or their family members or immigrating to Canada in some way. They are amazing. They are like so cinematic. I would finish a story and feel like I had watched an entire movie and just like close the book and like look out the window and be like, I cannot believe someone wrote that. I love the titular story, her first Palestinian. I really like Woodlands, which is a story about like a relationship between two people, and one person is constantly looking for community and the other person is looking for freedom from all relationships. Oh, and Enjoy Your Life Capo, which is about a Palestinian man who designed technology that he is considering selling to Israel. They are amazing, amazing stories, full stop. However many stories are in this, 9, 10, it's like reading 10 movies. Like, it's wild. Such a good collection. Now let's get into my favorite books of 2023. Can you believe it? So on the bottom of the 2023 new favorites, we have The Seaplane on Final Approach by Rebecca Ruxier, I want to say. I read this book because Phoebe Bridgers mentioned it in the Boy Genius Rolling Stone article. I cannot help but get that magazine and that band mixed up for the rest of my life, apparently. Did I enjoy reading it? It's honestly hard to say, but I literally have not stopped thinking about it since I read it, and I think I finished it in like April. It's just unlike anything I've ever read before in my life, and I can barely explain it. It's basically the main character has just graduated high school, and her summer job is working at an off-the-grid inn on a remote island in Alaska. And over the summer in Alaska, the days and nights, it's just fucked. If you don't know, up north, it can get really fucked where nights are very long or days are really long. It's insane. The reason she has gone to Alaska is because she wants to track down her sexy cousin and try and get married to him, even though he doesn't really know that she exists. And also she is obsessed with all things sleaze, like the word sleazy, and is obsessed with trying to define things as sleazy or not sleazy and become sleazy because she thinks her cousin is sleazy. Like, that is a good explanation of what this book is, and what is it? It is just so weird and troubling, but interesting. I've just truly never read anything like it in my life, and I really enjoyed it. Next, we have The First Thursday Murder Club book by Richard Osman. This is about, again, I've told a bunch of old people living at a retirement home who used to solve just cold case murders and see if they could solve it in the Thursday Murder Club that they formed, where every Thursday they just pour over cold cases. But then the local developer who wants to develop a portion of the land of their retirement home just dies. And they're like, we think we can solve this. And they embark on a journey to solve this murder. And it's just amazing. The characters are lovely. The main character is Joyce, and she's truly just like a sweet old lady. Then there's Elizabeth, who's like just super competent and almost honestly like giving spy vibes. Then there is Ron, who is an old Labor Party representative who loves football and is just very loud and amazing. And then there's Ibrahim, who is just like quiet, sensitive old man, and I would die for literally all of them. If anything happens to them in any of the upcoming books, I will put a pistol in my mouth. Okay, moving on. Then we have Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. Spoiler alert, another book by Eliza Clark is in my top 3 books of the year. And after I finished that, I was like, I literally must mainline anything that this woman has written into my brain. It has to happen. This book went really big on TikTok, but I cannot engage in short form content anymore for my mental health. So didn't really read it, and I didn't really know like what it was. This is basically like an extended monologue, first person perspective of the main character telling you a story as she goes through life. Basically, she's incredibly hot, spends a lot of time being incredibly hot. Like, she puts a lot of work in, she's gotten plastic surgery, she gets extensions, all of these things. She places an exorbitant amount of value on her looks. And she's a photographer who takes fetish photographs of men in compromising positions, and sometimes there's a little bit of body horror, things like that. And she might have murdered a man. And that's really all I can say. It's like Hot Girl American Psycho, but better. I have never read anything like this in my life. It's funny and engaging. It's about the art world in London and class and the ability to create art, but also it's just like insane. It's just a crazy thing to read, and I loved it. Eliza Clark has not come from like an MFA program. Like, she came from the art world, and her books read so easily. They are so addictive and so well done and so accessible and just amazing. I loved this book. Then we have Before the Memory Fades. This is the third Before the Coffee Gets Cold book, and it's the best one. okay? The gang is not at the regular cafe. No, they're at a seaside town, new location, some new characters. And in this story, one of the main characters wants to be a comedian. Two of the main characters who are going back in time are comedians, and there's several plots involving suicide. That's all I need from a book, to be quite honest. I just found these stories to be incredibly moving, incredibly interesting. These were just the stories in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold universe that I identified with the most, and it is honestly such a beautiful, fitting end to the trilogy, which is why I'm so pissed that the fourth book came out. It's just a great, great ending, and also just like takes place in a picturesque Japanese seaside town, and I was like, I want to be there. I want to be there right now. The Spy Who Came In from the Cold by John le Carré. I took a vacation to Berlin this spring and saw the Berlin Wall and was like, the Cold War is crazy. What an insane experience to have at 24 years of age. I know, but I am a victim of the public school system, okay? I'm a victim. And because of that, I was like, I didn't really know what the Cold War was. Like, I knew, but I didn't understand it on a deep level, and I really wanted to. So while we were there, my partner was like, you should read John le Carré novel. They're basically a series of novels all written by him. They're all spy novels. He used to be a part of the British, like, Central Intelligence Agency. He was a British spy during the Cold War and then wrote a ton of British spy novels. He also wrote Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, which is quite popular. And I don't want to say too much about this book because it's just phenomenal. It's a little dense. It's a little dense to read because it was written in the past, but it is basically about the Cold War and double agents and how in order to like protect American values of freedom in times of war, people oftentimes compromise those very values. And it's so interesting and so good. The version I have is the Penguin Modern Classics, and it has an introduction that is fucking phenomenal and explains a lot of the nuance that I didn't pick up when I read it the first time. So if you can get this edition, you definitely should. And do not read the introduction until you've read the whole book. Oh, but it's just so good. I was like, it's a really weird tonal kind of shift because it is like a pulpy spy action adventure, but it's also written with like kind of dense language mediating on the nuances of like American and Western exceptionalism and shit. Very, very interesting. And I learned a lot about the Cold War from it, even though it's a spy novel. So it was good. Then we have The Bloater by Rosemary Tonks. Somebody sent me earlier this year a New Yorker article about the author, and I thank them. I don't remember who they are, but they know exactly like the kind of media that I want to receive. And basically Rosemary Tonks was like a woman humorist in the UK in like the 40s and 50s. And she basically, after she wrote amazing, funny stories about women in London having sex and their experiences with men and socialites and blah, 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 had like a mental breakdown, became a born-again Christian, moved to the countryside, and would go to different libraries and buy her books, like check them out to burn them. And I was like, what? Basically, they have reissued a ton of her books, I think, and this is one, and it is amazing. It's just about a woman who is disgusted by this opera singer who is in her life and flirts with her, but she's so disgusted by him that she becomes incredibly attracted to him and thinks about cheating on her husband. That's really it. And her husband sucks. And it's just fucking hilarious. Like, okay, let me read one to you. Like here, she's talking to her coworker, and her coworker says, he plays guitar, and then she responds, oh, then you're bound to suffer, Jenny. They keep talking. She says, but of course, by then I was so attractive, I couldn't see a thing. And she goes, so you still don't know what he looks like? Just stuff like that. Like, it's just very, very quippy. I read the newspapers and get a vague impression that somebody is running the country, but who is it exactly? Just like a silly, fun book. Just so, I kind of like honestly want to reread this, and maybe I will. It's just so clever and funny. A real tragedy. She had a massive mental breakdown and tried to burn all her books, but I still like this book, so that's good for her. Then we have Sleepwalking by Meg Wolitzer. This is a reread. I read this a year or two ago, and I just wanted to revisit it. It's so lovely. This is like Meg Wolitzer's first book she wrote. She wrote it in university. Again, we don't have time to talk about the implications of somebody writing a fantastic book when they're younger than me. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in having that conversation. And it's about a group of 3 girls at this Ivy League university called the Death Girls, and they're each obsessed with a different poet it. One's obsessed with Sylvia Plath, one's obsessed with Anne Sexton, and one's obsessed with Lucy Danziger, which is a fictional poet made up for this book. The one that is obsessed with Lucy, her name is Claire, and she basically goes on a pilgrimage to talk and ingratiate herself into the lives of Lucy's parents. It's just a really interesting mediation on grief, and it's a beautiful book. I love when books are small like this in scale. There's not a lot of characters. It doesn't take place over a large period of time. Not a lot happens besides like emotional shifting, and I think it's just a very beautiful book. I really like it. That's all I can say. Then my fourth favorite book we have read this year is Ejaculate Responsibility, A Whole New Way to Think About Abortion by Gabrielle Blair. I picked this up at Skyline Books in Los Angeles. It is signed Who's Jealous? So this book basically has 28 different arguments that helps you argue for abortion and why abortion is a human right. The first one is men are 50 times more fertile than women. Women can be impregnated without experiencing pleasure. Men cause all unwanted pregnancies. Men can easily prevent abortions but choose not to. All these different arguments about abortion. I thought it was a really, really helpful book. In the introduction, the author does address the fact that the understanding of gender is very gender normative. Men is used in placeholder of people with penises. Women is used as placeholder for people with vaginas, that kind of thing. But it is just such a valuable nonfiction book. It's a quick read, and it really helped me not only get so mad about birth control being incredibly dangerous for women, and yet we all take it, even though it's way more expensive than vasectomies and way more dangerous than vasectomies, stuff like that. But it just also made me feel incredibly equipped to argue for abortion. I feel so educated on the topic now, and it's written so accessibly, and it's just a great, great read. You should read this book. It's fucking phenomenal. My third favorite book I read this year is Penance by Eliza Clark. My friend Alex sent it to me and he sent me a picture and he was like, have you read this? I think you would really like this. And I did. It was incredibly readable. I stayed up literally until 3 a.m. every night reading it because I just needed to know what happened so bad. This is a literary fiction novel written in the style of a true crime novel. So it's told through interviews. The narrator is a fake author writing a true crime novel. And it's about a group of 3 girls who lit their friend on fire the night Brexit happened in the UK. What? And is about what happened that night and each part of the book focuses on one of the 3 girls and their side of the story. And I don't know if it argues for or against true crime, but it's just an incredibly interesting exploration into our obsession with other people's horrors and traumas. And also just about how nasty teen girls can be, but the people who are bullied are incredibly nasty and the people who are popular in bullying are incredibly nasty. And it was a very, very good look at the dynamics of being a high school girl. It's so interesting. I don't want to say too much because I found myself learning about life and forming thoughts on true crime as this cultural movement. And also the fake author writing the fake true crime book would say that I don't agree with, and I'd be like, is that intentional? Is it not? What's happening? But I also just wanted to find out what happened the night of this murder. So it's criticizing true crime, but also making you obsessed with a fake true crime story. It's just wild and so well written and just a fun read. It's also a wild follow-up to Boy Parts because it's the same author that wrote Boy Parts, where it's that's a very kind of hot girl, f***ed up book. And this is that too, but it's a lot more nuanced and different. It's just such a wild second book to write. Love. My second favorite book of the year is Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger. I love Catcher in the Rye and f***ing sue me. Yes, I'm an incel, okay? That's not a crime. It's not. Technically, I love Catcher in the Rye, and I have tried to pick up Franny and Zoe since I was in high school and just really didn't get it. And I read it this year and I was like, I get it. I'm here, I'm locked in, I'm reading this book at the exact right time. Was blown away by it. Franny and Zoe is made up of 2 stories. One story following Franny Glass and one story following Zoe Glass. The Glass siblings are a group of 8 siblings. They're the Royal Tenenbaums. The Wes Anderson movie was based on them, if you know that movie. And they were all incredibly gifted, high-achieving children, and they're all f***ed up as adults. They were all in this quiz trivia whiz kid radio show as kids, and now their lives are f***ed. They are all so unhappy and so mentally ill. The Franny story was my favorite story, and it's just about Franny arriving at Yale, I believe, and having a weekend with her boyfriend, but in actuality having a breakdown because she quit the play because she realized that everybody acting was phony and competing for nothing, and she didn't want to compete because nothing matters. They're just heavily depressed, and the writing is so beautiful and simple and funny. This book is amazing. Like, I just can't really describe it beyond that. I'm not afraid to compete. It's just the opposite. Don't you see that? I'm afraid I will compete. That's what scares me. That's why I quit the theater department. Just because I'm so horribly conditioned to accept everybody else's values, and just because I like applause and people to rave about me, doesn't make it right. I'm ashamed of it. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of not having the courage to be an absolute nobody. Like, shut the fuck up. That's crazy. That's crazy. And finally, my favorite book of the year, 2023, is The Hours by Michael Cunningham. I know, literally, nobody had it on their 2023 bingo card, my favorite book being written by a man, but here we are. A Pulitzer Prize winner. I found this book because I am a subscriber to the New York Times, and I read the book review because I am nothing if not a pretentious piece of shit. And this author, after writing The Hours and winning the Pulitzer Prize, did not write for 10 years. Iconic, awesome, very me. And he wrote his first book in a long time, and it's coming out this year. I was gonna go see him talk, but I booked a gig, and I wanna kill myself. This book is basically, I haven't read Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, but it's a mediation on that. And I still enjoyed it even though I have not read Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which is a book that's just about a woman throwing a party and then I believe killing herself. This follows 3 different storylines, The Hours does. One is Virginia Woolf, the day she kills herself, I believe. But it follows a day in the life of Virginia Woolf, if not the day she kills herself. So, sorry, also spoiler alert on the life of Virginia Woolf, I'm so sorry. Another is a housewife living in the 1950s who's feeling disillusioned with her life and reading Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf and being just very depressed. And then another modern day one, which I believe is like the 90s, living through the AIDS crisis in New York City. And she is throwing a party for her friend who is a gay man who is winning a literary award and is in the throes of AIDS-related complications. And it is just the most beautiful, amazing novel I've ever written. It's written so intentionally. Every single woman's life is so varied and different, and it's just wild. It's about like the different roles women can play. Virginia Woolf is so career focused. Laura, who is the housewife, is grappling with her position as a caretaker. Clarissa is a caretaker inadvertently to her friend who has HIV. It's just beautiful and wild and about these little moments in these women's lives, and you should fucking read it. That's all of my favorite books this year. Also, literally every book I've read this year. Thank you so much for watching this entire video. It's way too long, but you know, you deserve to be caught up. Thank you so much for watching my videos this year. If you've been watching my videos this year has been so much fun. I've been having a great time. My brain is melted. I have literally no thoughts left in my head. If you want to follow along in real time as I read books, I review every single book that I read on my Instagram story and put it in the highlight on my Instagram, 2023 books. It'll be 2024 books for the new year. Have a great rest of your year. Take care of yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.